This is the Reason interview with Nick Gillespie. My guest today is Nathan Rabin. He is was an original longtime writer for the Onion's AV Club, starting in 1996, was there for almost 20 years. He now runs Nathan Rabin's Happy Place, an incredible site that is dedicated and committed to fisking, doing deep readings of trash culture. We're going to talk about all of that and more. Nathan Rabin, thanks for talking to Reason.
No, thank you for having me. This is a real honor. Very exciting.
Okay. Yes. Some of our listeners or viewers might remember you from such classic Reason videos as the Insane Clown Posse Goes to Washington and talks about First Amendment rights and things like that. Let's get started. You, in The Joy of Trash, your new book, Nathan Rabin's Happy Places, the definitive guide to the very worst of everything. At one point, you call yourself a professional rememberer. Why do we need such wondrous beings as yourself? What is a professional rememberer?
Well, I specifically use that within the context of an article about the scene in the motion picture Hyde Park on the Hudson, where FDR, as portrayed by Bill Murray, our most respected and beloved funny man, gets a hand job from his third cousin.
Right.
And I saw that. I think I heard about that before it came out. It was kind of this weird thing where it's kind of this, Oscar bait, middle brow historical drama, and yet it has, again, the scene where he gets a hand job from his cousin. And I kind of thought, it's kind of my job, professionally, existentially, it's my destiny to remember things like this and then to point them out and then to, be a historian of weird, random, unimportant, but unbelievably fascinating shit. Like, for example, I just, right before this interview began, I discovered that Pusha T, the very respected rapper from Clips, probably one of the most respected, one of the most revered gangster rappers around, had just recorded a diss track towards McDonald's.
Right.
And he recorded this for Arby's. Arby's, they paid him money, cash money, to go hard at McDonald's. And it's amazing. And one of the things that's really amazing about it, is that it's a legitimate diss track, and it ends with a cocaine reference.
Yeah.
It ends
America's roast beef, yes, sir. Right. I'm pretty sure Jamocha shakes have cocaine in them. That's why I can never just have one.
And then one of the stupid things that I remember, one of the weird bit of knowledge that I possess, is that he goes way back with fast food, because he's the person who actually wrote the jingle "I'm Loving It."
Wow.
So there was an element here of he references the fact that I'm the one who made the whole world love it, but now he's, it's kind of like the Dell guy, I think at one point became like an Apple spokesman. So I guess if you pay people enough money, they will betray McDonald's.
Is that
will go hard.
Is that the the import of this? I mean, because you love this culture, right? You love trash culture, which is by definition is commercial culture on some level. So you're not. The fun of it is not simply that, if you pay somebody enough money, they will, start, they'll diss McDonald's and start pretending they eat Arby's. It's more than that, right?
Well, there were certain things that I just kind of gravitated towards in The Joy of Trash, one of which was anti-drug stuff, which I'm kind of fascinated just because I grew up in the 1980s. I was kind of a product of the just say no aesthetic.
Right. And the dare.
Totally. Right? And I just I remember, God, when I was 19 years old, smoking pot for the first time, like everything adults have told me is a lie.
Right.
I've been deceived my entire life, and kind of the anti-drug stuff that I talk about in the book, stuff like the cartoon All-Stars to the Rescue, which was, I think all Gen Xers remember this and nobody else does, but every single cartoon character, every major cartoon character joined together It was basically Reefer Madness, except that it was animated. And you had like these surreal interludes, like Baby Kermit talking to the protagonist, like a 13-year-old who started getting high.
Yeah.
And it destroyed his life instantly. And it's this thing where, it was a huge cultural thing at the moment. And then I think people have just kind of forgotten about it. Kind of another good example of that was Get High on Yourself.
Yeah, this is the Robert Evans, the
yeah,
producer of The Godfather and of The Cotton Club, who ended up becoming convicted of cocaine trafficking.
Yeah. It's crazy because I think now we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of The Godfather, and I actually got to hang out at Robert Evans' home. Wow. He was promoting his second memoir, which talking about things that are forgotten.
So wait, he is not still alive, is he?
No.
Yeah. So this was this is when I assume when the kid stays in the picture.
No, this was his follow-up.
Okay.
The Kid Stays in the Picture. It was called The Fat Lady Sang.
Yeah.
Which was kind of appropriate, and he flew me to his home to kind of talk as a representative of the young people. I think he thought that I was way hipper and cooler and more popular than I actually.
He must have been very disappointed when you.
He was very disappointed by me, and he never got out of the bed. He never got out of his pajamas. I remember talking to him, and he's like, what should I do? Like, how do I reach people in this day and age? Yeah. And I said, well, there's this really great medium called podcasts. There are people like Mark Maron. I'm sure he would love to have you on his podcast. Yeah. And he's like, wow, that sounds great. What is a podcast? Right. I'm like, well, it's kind of like a radio show, except in a computer, and kind of anybody can do it. So yeah, that was kind of this fascinating
talk
experience.
About the Get High on Yourself. This is kind of like the Roots or the Godfather of that genre. It's a full employment act for both former addicts as well as future addicts, and then super squeaky clean guys, because Bob Hope is in that, right?
Oh yeah. Although he comes off really sleazy. He actually comes off really badly, and he's supposed to come off well because he's Bob Hope. Right. But he's like, so what happened basically was Robert Evans was the most successful studio producer of the late 60s and 70s, and he went independent and produced all of these amazing movies. Your Chinatowns or Marathon Mans or Popeyes. And then while he was filming Popeye, he got caught with liquid cocaine. Wow. And he was only supposed to produce a jingle. But in a possibly cocaine-fueled frenzy of creativity, he decided we're not just going to do a song or a jingle, we're going to do an entire special. It's not going to be a half hour, it's going to be an hour-long special. But even that is not going to be enough. We're going to do an entire week of Get High on Yourself program. And it speaks to what an incredibly charismatic, persuasive person he is, that he could convince all of these people to do this. And it's a really bizarre meditation on Robert Evans' life. It kind of begins with all of these people, like Robert Wagner, talking about when Robert Evans says you show up somewhere, you show up immediately. And it keeps going, and it keeps going in these really, really bizarre directions. One of which is there's people rapping about drugs and how terrible they are. And one is talking about like, oh man, I was shooting up heroin, and my friend who was right next to me, he died in front of me. And then literally the next shot is of Ted Nugent in like this sweaty rock and roll hall. And he's making fun of this. So he's like, these people have told me to sing this silly song. And again, just like making these weird eyes and just literally taking a crap on Robert Evans and all of his good intentions. It's just, and then after that, they have a bunch of R&B superstars sing with a little help from my friends,
right. which is a drug song.
It only is a drug. It's from Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which is probably the most prominent drug album of all time. So the fact that this exists and that it kind of had this secondary life, and The Kid Stays in the Picture, his very revered cult memoir, and then it became a cult audiobook, and then it became a cult
documentary.
Documentary.
And it's fantastic. It is a fantastic work of kind of Hollywood life.
Oh, totally. And it's total. I mean, it's total self-mythology. It's totally, and it's it's both pure and total bullshit at the same time. But in it, Robert Evans talks about how he got busted for cocaine,
Yeah.
but then he pulled it all together with the Woodstock of the 1980s,
Yeah.
which is how he describes that. And I just loved that. And I heard it over and over and over again. I never actually seen it, but I was doing another podcast and someone was like, yeah, it's just as crazy as you think it's going to be.
Right.
Like, you totally need to experience it. And that was 100% true. Like, I'm so
Have
happy because, yeah, it's nuts.
Have you did you watch it while high? Does that give it, it's kind of like Sergeant Pepper's, you listen to it sober and it's one album, you listen to it on drugs, it's a better album.
I definitely did. I experienced a lot of stuff while I'm high. It's one of the nice things about working for yourself, is that there's nobody to tell you that you shouldn't be high when you experience a lot of ridiculous. I also want to say that when I watched Shasta McNasty, I was also high. Didn't help. Nothing could have helped.
Explain Chester McNasty.
Shasta McNasty. Oh, sure.
Or Shasta McNasty.
Kind of when I was putting this book together, I was kind of like, this is an opportunity to reach for the stars and write about all of the crazy bullshit that I wanted to write about, but it didn't really make sense from like a cost benefit analysis because Shasta McNasty is 23 episodes. And God, I think it was like UPN back in the late 90s, where which is kind of synonymous with television that is an affront to all things that are good. One of the things I wanted to write about that I never quite got around to was The Secret Diary of Desmond Pfeiffer, which was a notorious Civil War themed outrageous comedy that I think had like 4 episodes before it was canceled. Homeboys from Outer Space was another of them. And Shasta McNasty was this sitcom, kind of ahead of its time in some ways, and then it's very kind of postmodern and metatextual and a lot of like cutaway gags, but it's about a rap rock trio that gets a deal and then they move to Venice Beach. And it's astonishingly, it kind of has a cult largely because of its name. Like, this is the stupidest name ever. And like halfway through, they changed it to Shasta to reflect that it was getting less and less nasty. And then halfway through they brought in Vern Troyer as Vern, and there's what I sort of talk about the ending of it. Like, it was a horrible show, but it ended up doing something useful and good for society, which is that it aired immediately before Dilbert. So because it was so unpopular, Dilbert ended up getting canceled, and Scott Adams.
And you're happy about that?
Yeah, I'm very, very happy. And Scott Adams, he blames Shasta McNasty for ruining his opportunity of, otherwise Dilbert we're gonna have, it's gonna be like The Simpsons, it's gonna be like Family Guy, but because of Shasta McNasty, and I just love the idea that particularly something called Shasta McNasty is destroying Scott Adams' dreams, and it really is as bad, if not worse, than its reputation would suggest.
So you mentioned that you are Gen X. What year were you born? How old are you right now?
1976.
Okay, so the bicentennial year.
Yeah.
A very good year for crap culture as well. I am older than you, and I remember the the payoff of the bicentennial year was Gerald Ford was going to do the last bicentennial minute, which had been these minute-long infomercials that celebrities would do, Jimmy Stewart and past presidents and whatnot. But it was the 70s were so bad. His bicentennial minute was only 40 seconds long. It's kind of a sad but righteous commentary on kind of Gerald Ford of mid-century. But so you're a boomer. I'm sorry, you're a Gen Xer.
A Gen Xer for sure.
In both, but particularly the late boom and Gen X. Irony is it's kind of the medium, or it's the water that you swim in. Where does that come from, and why does irony allow for better viewing or more enjoyment of something?
Well, I mean, I think there was a certain cynicism sort of bred into my generation. And I remember, growing up and coming of age in the mid-1990s and working for the AV Club and the Onion when I was 21 years old. And there's this idea that everything had become perfect, that we as a society, we had all of these problems. We had the Cold War. We had the economy was in the toilet. We had all of these things. And then in the 1990s, the internet happened. and the internet was going to change everything. The internet was going to usher us into this sort of utopian, wonderful world. And I actually had a column called The Simpsons Decade that I wrote for Rotten Tomatoes very briefly. And in hindsight, it was an incredibly, incredibly non-commercial project. Like, it was a very kind of weird aesthetic idea, which was esoteric idea. And it was that basically in the 1990s, sort of, we were out of problems. You know, things were so good that we started sort of looking inward. And the best comedy of that generation, of that decade, was postmodern. It was metatextual, and it was rooted in television. You know, there was this
And
idea.
so it's people are, you know, text, or The Simpsons is obviously
Oh,
the classic example. It's always referencing either itself or other tropes and conceits and motifs in other popular culture.
Yeah, I mean, Look Well, Pulp Fiction. I mean, like Goodfellas. Like, you look at Goodfellas, and Goodfellas is incredibly metatextual. It's a story about storytelling. It's a story about itself, and it's also incredibly dark and incredibly ironic. And the fact that there are people who think that it's a movie about how Martin Scorsese thinks that gangsters are cool, and you should be like them. Like, that's really, really kind of fascinating to me. Even stuff like Weekly World News was a good example of something that looked like a newspaper tabloid, but it was a parody, and it was a really, really inspired parody. And the fact that people confused the two, I think spoke to how well they did. And yeah, I think for my generation, sort of 9/11 was sort of a game changer. And 9/11 was kind of the end of this idea of technology will save us all. And I think also too, it was a combination of, in the 90s, you had the internet bust. And it was weird because I remember, like, when I was at the Onion, we were the jesters of this world, and you know, the world opened up to us. We had like these, you know, weirdos in Madison, Wisconsin, who somehow had stumbled upon sort of this magical formula, you know, and kind of taken this medium of fake news, you know, you know, they did not invent fake news. You know, the National Lampoon did stuff like that, Saturday Night Live, but they found a way to do it in a literary way, and they found a way to do it that really resonated with generation. And again, kind of spoke their language, which was a language of dark comedy, and a language of irony, and a language that was sort of permeated in this deep, deep, deep sort of love-hate relationship with pop culture. And I think that's part of what The Joy of Trash is. It's sort of about all the things that are objectively horrible, but that give us delight, or give us joy, or that we never stop talking about, or celebrating, or exploring.
I think it was Graydon Carter, who of course had, you know, as one of the creators of Spy magazine in the 80s, and which you know, went into the 90s a little bit. He was at Vanity Fair, and he said 9/11 ended irony. There was no irony after 9/11. Do you think that's true? Or is it actually that irony becomes even more kind of rich and baroque and a necessary way of navigating, you know, the world?
Oh, totally. And I think there was kind of this idea that, you know, for a couple of months or so, we were going to be sincere. We were going to be earnest, and that it would somehow be an affront to the people who died and the terrorist attack of 9/11 to have fun or enjoy ourselves. And I think what we kind of realized is that you need comedy, you need satire. It's not an affront to, you know, all that's good in the world. It is what's good in the world. And I remember flying to New York. The Onion started in Madison, and then they flew to New York. They moved to New York just before the internet bubble burst. And yeah, I remember right after 9/11, I think I flew in for my editor, my friend Rob, because I didn't write for the Onion, I wrote for the AV Club, and he was the editor of the Onion. He just wrote Tom and Pammy. The Tommy and Pamela Anderson miniseries. How to talk. And I remember going to the Onion office, and there was this understandably very funereal atmosphere, and the sense of like, how do we deal with this? Like, do we make a joke about this? Do we not make a joke about this? Like, we have to address this, but can we address this without, people wanting to attack us with pitchforks, without, coming off as tasteless and whatnot? And again, these were these weird dudes and dudettes from Wisconsin, but they kind of found the perfect way of handling it, and handling it in a way that was simultaneously ironic and dark, but also very humane, and acknowledging like the very real emotions and the overwhelming emotions. And they wanted to get the Pulitzer Prize for the 9/11 issue, and they should have gotten the 9/11.
And this was where they took a couple weeks off, if I'm remembering. And then when they came back,
totally
the
did,
main headline was "Terrorists find themselves in hell," right? Or surprised to find themselves in hell.
There were a whole bunch, and again, they had like 6 or 7 different stories. But again, they just got everything right,
and that's
so proud.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that also, one of the other great kind of ironic, dark stories that are very funny that comes out of 9/11 is Gilbert Gottfried's a Friars Club roast, where I believe it was the Hugh Hefner roast, and he was a couple weeks after 9/11, and he started making 9/11 jokes, and people were yelling too soon. And then he told the Aristocrats, which was ultimately turned into a documentary about this particular humor. But what is it, what is it about that, at the absolute darkest moments? What is it about irony, that allows us to stand close to disaster?
Well, I mean, I think irony and satire and comedy, they can bring light to a very dark situation, and it can be very cathartic, being able to laugh at things that you're not supposed to laugh about, or being able to laugh about things that are incredibly dark, and the world has changed tremendously since then. But yeah, I mean, I feel like that's just such a useful way of like, comedy is not only worthwhile, like it's essential. It's vital. Like, the world without comedy would be a bleak and hopeless and meaningless world, and comedy without irony, I think, would be kind of empty and kind of weird. And yeah, I mean, I think about like Jon Stewart and what an incredibly valuable role he sort of played for a very long time as the host of The Daily Show. And he kind of went away, and he came back, and he didn't matter anymore.
Right.
And that's, and I watched.
He also had post 9/11 series. I mean, they went off the air for a little bit, and then when he came back, it was simultaneously touching and very funny and very kind of dark.
Oh, totally. And that was the same sort of thing, that kind of the world was so dark that you needed somebody to make light of it, and you needed to be able to laugh at it. And it's very true, because you kind of look back now, and sort of George W. Bush has been reimagined as like this cuddly teddy bear of a guy, just as this nice man who paints, and he's friends with Michelle Obama, and he's just loves his family. And at the time, the idea was, Jon Stewart had to, speak truth to power, because this was a very evil organization, and this was a very evil administration. And that's true in a lot of different ways, but things have gotten so bad that, sort of Trump made Bush seem like Lincoln by comparison,
right, who of course had his detractors, right, as well.
Oh yeah. Everybody did.
What do you make of speaking of kind of the Bush years, the South Park guys, Matt Stone and Trey Parker, created a sitcom called That's My Bush, which was funny, and it was very dark, but it was a failure. What accounts for a direct hit on Bush not working, do you think?
Well, I think part of it wasn't a direct hit, and then the kind of the conceit was it would be funny to do like a very silly, very stupid 1980s sort of wacky broad comedy. But the president of the United States is the lead character, and I think everybody thought that Gore was going to win. Right. So for a long time, that was in pre-production as a sitcom about Al Gore. But I think what was so brilliant about it was it totally would have. I think it came on like 2001, or it would have been perfect for my Simpsons decade thing, because it was about television. It was about how silly and ridiculous, but also how kind of awesome television is as well, and how we grew up with television as like this dominant medium. We grew up with sitcoms. Even now, I'm 45 years old, and like my wife is 7 years younger, and she loves Seinfeld. But otherwise, it seems really weird that there are phantom people laughing on TV shows. And there's just like 3 cameras. And that whole medium just seemed the most natural thing in the world when I was a kid. Well, maybe not the most natural thing in the world, but it seemed like a natural thing. And now you look at it and you're like, my God, how why did we abide by that? Like, why did we think that was funny? Why did we not get incredibly annoyed by all of that stuff? So yeah, I mean, even like, you go back and look at the 1970s. The variety show was a big thing, and you go back and you watch the variety show now, and like A, everybody was on cocaine, B, everybody was on LSD. Like, this is the most ridiculous, tacky, like gross stuff in the world that I talked about in the Drave Trash, the Brady Bunch Variety Hour, which is kind of a notorious bit of entertainment. I think most people kind of know it from the Simpsons parody and the Simpsons variety time, the Simpsons Good Time Fun Hour. And yeah, it was notable for a number of different things, one of which was that one of the actresses chose not to appear on there, which again shouldn't have been that big of a thing, but it was already such a weird project. The idea that these normal everyday
and we were getting a second tier Jan, if I'm remembering.
We were getting a
passed
fake Jan, and it's surreal because Robert Reed was this very serious actor.
He's a Shakespeare classically trained actor.
He went to the actor's studio, and he hated the Brady Bunch because it was incredibly stupid and it was incredibly corny. And he was like, "I'm an actor. I'm trying to bring truth to this character." And then for some reason, he really liked the variety show, which just got weirder and weirder and weirder. Like it there were all of these medleys. I started talking about like the first medley was a Babyface, and kind of like an old standard, and then Love to Love You, which is a song about the female orgasm and about female sexual pleasure. And you have Robert Reed singing and dancing to Love You with like this weird smile on his face. And
he's not a good singer or dancer.
He's terrible. And it's written into the show. I mean, Florence Henderson,
who was a song and dance gal.
She's fantastic. You know,
she's a triple threat.
Oh, she's that weird thing is like you get like a crush on Florence Henderson. It's kind of a weird thing, but she was a very attractive, very dynamic, very appealing woman. And then the kids, they had like their Brady kids thing, and then the one person who really couldn't sing or dance was Robert Reed. They just kept on bringing in weirder and weirder elements. Sharo was like brought in as like romantic competition. Paul Williams also fell in love with Ann B. Davis, who had quit entertainment because she felt so terrible about being part of such an abomination, because she was living such an ungodly life. She was brought in, and it didn't make any sense for them to be doing a variety show to begin with. It really did not. It makes sense for them to bring in their maid, and then this is, and again, this is, I don't think I even got to talk about this in my piece. Her love interest was Rip Taylor. And
he's a very attractive man.
She was a very Christian woman. Who quit television for Christ, and he was, a very flamboyant performer. So that was really, really interesting.
If I'm remembering correctly, in the burnt out memories of my mind, there was also a lot of ice skating, ice dancers.
I believe what happened was it was because of Donnie and Marie. This was the Croft brothers, and Donnie and Marie were really great ice skaters. So like, we should bring in that element, but we can't do ice skating. That's been done before. Let's do water ballet. So there will be the set, and then right next to the set is this Olympic-sized pool with like all of these, and some of them were like comedy. They were doing like comedy water ballet, and some of them were like graceful. And it's like, I'm glad that it exists. I'm glad that it's on YouTube, and I'm glad that I was able to experience this for the rest of humanity.
Talking about Gen X irony, or kind of dealing with the lies that the culture was telling you, I remember a large kind of trope among Gen X people was that Robert Reed he died of AIDS. So he was the television's, he was the perfect father, who presided over a blended family that actually worked. He was the lifeline to kids raised in an era of divorce, and he turns out to be gay and die of AIDS. And that is kind of the shorthand of the world that Gen X was living in, right? That you're being fed this one story, but here's the truth.
I was talking too, like Rock Hudson. Rock Hudson in the 1950s. Like people thought he's a very macho guy. His name is Rock, and I think and there's this fascinating guy, I think Henry Wilson was his name, who basically created all of these stars. Troy Donahue, Tab Hunter, that was another big one. Even Rip Torn was like one of his final sort of proteges. Rip Torn went a different way. But and you look at it now and it's, you kind of go back and watch these things and there are like all of these sort of winking references to him being gay. And I mean, the fact that like Tony Randall was his sidekick, and Tony Randall was very effete.
Although Tony Randall turns out to at least fathered multiple children in his 80s. I mean,
so I think there was, and I kind of think about, like when I was a kid, I read Mad Magazine, and Mad Magazine served a very useful purpose, and then it said adults are liars, and commercials sell you things that you don't need, and people on television are idiots and liars and all that. And I remember thinking like, it felt like truth. It felt like I'm being taught something that I'm not supposed to be taught, and it's funny and it's entertaining and it speaks to me.
Right. It's really the beginning. I mean, it's media literacy ultimately that you're being taught by.
Totally. Well, and I was just saying, and again, I think that you can draw a very direct connection between that and Weird Al Yankovic, who I think I discovered when I was 8 years old. And I think about, I've written many, many books about him. But I think, one of his I think crucial lines, was in Yoda. We're speaking from the perspective of Mark Hamill / Luke Skywalker. He goes, the long-term contract that I had to sign said I'll be making these movies until the end of time. And you look at it, and Carrie Fisher died. She died of a drug overdose. It was very, very sad. And she still ended up appearing in these movies. So not even death could, that's how ridiculous. And you look at, he'd make jokes about like, oh, what if they're, 8 Rocky sequels, and it's like or like Spider-Man, had a song called Ode to Oda, and he references when the sequel comes around, and not only was there a sequel to Spider-Man, but there was a second sequel, and then there was a reboot, and then there was a sequel to the reboot, and then there was a reboot, and then there was a sequel to the reboot, and then there was a reboot that brought together all 3 of the Spider-Man things at the same time. So like as cynical and jaded as Weird Al was about popular entertainment, real world ended up being even tackier and even more ridiculous.
Let's talk a little bit about the AV Club, because when that emerged, and it to me, what it represented, ESPN did something similar with sports. I think rock magazines like Blender did something with music, where in the AV Club, and you were the head writer and kind of, a controlling kind of temperament there for a long time. What was fascinating is that you guys loved what you were writing about, but you also never missed an opportunity to make fun of your the people that you were writing about. Do you feel like that has become a kind of baseline, that we now live in a world of kind of super fans who are not, it's not the 60s fan club people who are like, oh, I mean, to think of I guess a Brady Bunch episode, if Joe Namath comes over and he touches your hand or something, or Davy Jones or whatever, you'll never wash your hand again. It's kind of like, everything about a person or about a producer or a creative team. And you love them, but you also make fun of them relentlessly. Has that become a kind of the way that we engage now that we're in a world where everybody's selling something all of the time, and this allows us to, kind of deal with it and sift through the bullshit while also enjoying the product?
Yeah, well, and I think there was kind of an innate cynicism sort of brought into it. And I feel like, at the beginning, definitely at least, we were all very idealistic and very passionate, and I think about, like Roger Ebert, like watching him and Gene Siskel on TV and thinking like, my God, that seems like the coolest job in the entire world. Like that seems so cool. And then, I got to go at the screening room in Chicago. And Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel were there. And I remember the first time I ever went to see something was, I think it was Wild Things. And Wild Things, and then Wild Things, and then an Ed Burns movie. And nobody cares about Ed Burns. It doesn't matter which one it was. But I remember just being so nervous. And I was 20 years old. I was like the very first time I got to do this. And I remember sitting down in the back and thinking like, okay, this is where you sit if you're don't want to be noticed, and if you're like the struggling kid, you want to be invisible. So I remember sitting down, and then Gene Siskel sitting down immediately next to me and being like, oh my god, this is so terrifying. And like after the first movie, he like tapped me on the shoulder and he said, young man, you are sitting where I would like to be sitting. I'm gonna point to a seat. I wonder. No, he's talking like Barack Obama now. But I also met Barack Obama, but not during that. So he's like, I'm gonna point to a place over there, and I went. I'm like, oh my god, I committed a hideous faux pas. But it made me look at Roger Ebert, and he wrote Beyond the Valley of the Dolls,
right?
You know, which is like this masterpiece of dark comedy, masterpiece of irony, this incredibly meta, weird, crazy, cool movie. And to me, that is as impressive a legacy as you know the 50 years that he spent. So I think Ebert was kind of a good model in terms of loving movies and being passionate about that. You never, you know, even when he was being cruel, you know, there was still this. And I think about like, you know, he gave UHF a really negative review, and part of it he's talking about how like Al doesn't carry himself appropriately and his posture is bad, and I'm like, how dare you say that about Weird Al Yankovic? So yeah, I think he was kind of a good model in terms of being really passionate and idealistic and caring and loving what you're talking about, but also having a sense of humor about it. Also, you know, the various, you know, ideas, you know, kind of. Yeah, he came up with a whole bunch of phrases. Before I created the Manic Pixie Dream. I didn't really create the Manic Pixie Dream. I coined the phrase Manic Pixie Dream.
Well, why don't we talk about that? Because I want to get to that. You explain what the Manic Pixie Dream Girl is and why you retired the phrase, or you expressed some sorrow at kind of naming the concept, which is everywhere when you look at it. But then you recently have kind of revived it a bit. So what is a Manic Pixie Dream Girl, and why does she haunt your and ours dreams?
Sure. Basically, God, I have a column called My World of Flops that is currently in its 15th year of operation. And in the very first entry, I wrote about the Cameron Crowe movie Elizabethtown. And I wrote very negatively about it. And I sort of talked about Kirsten Dunst's character, who is a stewardess who swoops into the life of a very depressed superstar shoemaker, played by Orlando Bloom. God, I haven't thought about this movie a very long time. He worked for Alec Baldwin, you know, as kind of like a
naturally
Phil Knight, which now looking back is God, and it's such a ridiculous movie. At one point, he's going to commit suicide, but he's going to commit suicide with like a death stationary bike that he has created. So he goes home for, you know, somebody's funeral, and he meets this woman, and she just cannot stop talking. And she is so charming and so adorable that it's obnoxious and over the top. And sort of her role in the movie is to be this fantasy figure and to redeem this sort of sad, sulky, depressed man, and to teach him about life. And what's interesting to me is that she has no real internal life. You know, she just kind of is this creation of, you know, a dude, male fantasy, totally a male fantasy. And you sort of
see a version of her in almost every Cameron Crowe movie has some echo of that.
Oh, well, it's funny. I actually, and at one point he said like, oh, you know, like Nathan Rabin's an interesting guy. Like we should grab a beer sometime. And I'm like, oh, that's really nice of you. And I remember Aloha. That Aloha? Yeah. Has Emma Stone as their Manic Pixie Dream Girl. And not only is she an unusually pure, unusually obnoxious Manic Pixie Dream Girl, but she's supposed to be a quarter Hawaiian and a quarter Asian. And I remember, like, if nothing else, this would make him averse to ever doing this again. When you call somebody out on your bullshit, when you say you created this thing, and it's a sexist, ridiculous, romantic power fantasy, again, you'd kind of shame him into not doing that again. And then he did it again in Aloha, only it was even worse and even more disastrously reviewed. And he blocked me on Twitter. shortly after that.
That's the
Um,
life of a
but yeah,
critic. Now,
but yeah,
why did you retire? You didn't retire, but you said you were sorry that you had
yeah,
kind of
I had very.
created the boomlet in Manic
Oh
Pixie
yeah.
Dream
Well, I
Girl
think.
analysis.
Oh yeah. Well, I think part of it was that it became kind of a tool, kind of a weapon
Mhm.
to wield against people, and they felt kind of bad in that people would interview Kirsten Dunst and say,
Mhm.
"Hey, in that movie Elizabethtown, you played this, ridiculous male fantasy that had
Right.
no roots in reality, and was just kind of this, misogynistic conceit." And
And it's
how
misogynistic because the girl only exists to like
to
make
serve the man.
to save the man. Yeah, to
Oh,
serve the
very
man.
much so,
Yeah,
very
yeah,
much so. Oh, for sure.
yeah.
And I just felt really bad about that. And I
Mhm.
remember Zoe Kazan did a
Mhm.
movie called Ruby Sparks, which I still have not seen for some inexplicable reason. And she said, "What do you think of the Manic Pixie Dream Girl?" And she said, I think it's a sexist term
Mhm.
created by a blogger."
Mhm.
And I said, "How dare you call me a blogger? I'm not a blogger. I work for The Onion. I work for
Yeah.
Juggalo." But no, I just felt bad, and I felt like a lot of people were kind of any woman that was quirky, any woman
Right.
that was upbeat, was kind of used as a tool to attack women and to
Right.
attack female characters, and then to
As
kind of
opposed to the male creators of the Manic Pixie Dream
right,
Girl.
right, right,
Yeah.
right, and that and part of it too is like Kirsten Dunst, Zoe
Mhm.
Deschanel, Natalie Portman,
Right.
like. And I think Natalie Portman feels ambivalent about Garden
Mhm.
State, and kind of
Right.
realizes now like he was kind of onto something. But that was the
Mhm.
thing is I felt like it went from being a tool to attack sexism to being
Right.
a tool that could be sexist
Right.
in the wrong hands. And because it was so widespread, it was kind of becoming it kind of belonged to everybody. And it was kind
Yeah.
of weird for me because I had a very kind of concrete conception of what it is and it just got broader and broader and
Mhm.
broader. And at a certain point, I felt like I have no control over it.
Yeah.
At the same time, I kind of feel like I'm a dude,
Mhm.
and I'm talking about women and archetypes and these fantasy figures. Like I shouldn't have control necessarily.
Right. Of
Like I
course
think
not.
something that just kind of happened that was utterly surreal
Well,
was
and
like,
this is kind of what happens in the culture, but especially pop culture. And what you do is you take movies that were made in mostly earnestly, right? I mean, people were
yeah, yeah,
trying
yeah.
to do something, and then you give them a different meaning and you put them in a different context. So,
Oh, and also, I
yeah,
mean, some of the movies that they talked about, stuff like Harold and Maude,
right,
Annie Hall bringing a baby. Like,
right,
I don't want to say those movies
right.
are corrupted with lies and
Hmm.
corrupted with deceit. Because people love these characters.
Yeah,
And if you look at Annie Hall, like she was based on Diane Keaton. I mean,
yeah.
even Cameron Crowe said, the woman that I wrote Claire about and Elizabeth Town, like that was a real person. And
Hmm.
how dare you say this to me? And one of the conceits of the Manic Pixie Dream Girl is that she can't be real.
Hmm.
That she's this fictional figure, that she's this figure of fantasy. And very recently, there was a marathon profile about Grimes
Hmm.
in Vanity Fair, and I had to read it because I was writing a blog post about it, and
Yeah,
because it was culturally important, and because there's a pull quote of her
yeah,
talking about how she does not think that the Manic Pixie Dream Girl is an insult.
right,
She embraces every aspect of it, and reading that article, you think this woman is a Manic Pixie Dream Girl.
right.
Like other than not existing, she embodies everything, even like the dynamic between
Hmm.
her and Elon Musk. Like Elon
Hmm.
Musk is a quintessential, sad,
Yeah. Troubled,
awkward.
brooding
Yeah,
genius, and he needs
yeah.
to he needs to break
He's
out of his shell and
he's
live, damn it.
well,
Yeah.
he's the richest man in the world,
Right.
and that's
But
and
he's
that's
missing something, right?
oh,
He's missing
and
that spark of love and
yeah, those
joy.
seven kids,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
aren't enough, damn it.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then kind of their relationship kind of had that dynamic,
Right.
and they kept breaking up, and yeah, and it's not only is Grimes a Manic Pixie Dream Girl, but she's kind of a parody of a Manic Pixie Dream
Right.
Girl. She's something that's already kind of outsized and
Do you
crazy and
think, and
outrageous,
of course
and makes it
now
even crazier.
she is reportedly living with Chelsea Manic, so she's taken, the Manic Pixie Dream Girl to
Yeah,
outer
yeah, yeah.
space or something,
A
and
different direction, and
yeah,
especially considering how transphobic
yeah,
Elon Musk can be. His great love for
Right.
Babylon Bee, which you sort of talk about irony. Like, I think that's kind of an interesting how you sort of fix the
Do you
onion.
think
Taking,
is Grimes in? Do you think she is in control of the character she is building, or is it?
Well, and that's part of me. It's sort of like, as a dude, it's not my place to say, Grimes, you can't be a manic pixie dream girl. That's
no, you of course. But
yourself.
does she know what she's doing, or is this?
I think it's performative. You know, I think that's kind of, women have sort of reclaimed the idea of the manic pixie dream girl, and I'm like, if you want to do that, like. The stuffy,
you are now you're the old man. You're the one who needs to lighten up and to get out there and live, tear away the curtain.
It's funny because my wife, she was kind of a manic pixie dream girl when we started dating. 8 years and 2 kids, 13 years and 2 kids later. That most assuredly is not the case. But I was also kind of my own manic pixie dream girl. Like I had this nervous breakdown sort of in 2012 when I was working on this book. You don't know me, but you don't like me. And I kind of became this person that was very different from who I was even a year earlier. I became this big Fish fan. I became a big Juggalo. Like all of these things that in a million years wouldn't have occurred to me 3 years earlier. I just kind of became this sort of freewheeling eccentric. It has been a gift and a curse. And I've also just kind of come to terms like if you're a writer, very, very lucky if you come across a phrase that captures the public imagination. It was a Jeopardy answer.
Yes, it was like, you're very proud of that, as you should be. Yes.
Well, it's better than being a self-published blogger.
Talk a little bit about the Juggalos. The Juggalos are the fans, the super fans of the Insane Clown Posse, which is a band that kind of defies parody because they both enact it and then don't give a shit. What is it about the Insane Clown Posse that you find fascinating and about the Juggalo phenomenon?
Well, I think, I kind of started I tried to write a book about Fish in, I think, 2009, because I felt
the kind of premier jam band of their generation.
For sure. And I kind of took it to my agent, and he said, we don't know if there's a book to be read just about Fish in 2009. Like, how about if you cover a whole bunch of different sort of musical subcultures? And at that point, my girlfriend, now wife, was getting her social worker's degree at Brown, and she did not have a television. So the thing that we would just watch over and over again on streaming was the Miracles video. And
the Insane Clown Posse video where the takeaway line is magnets, how do they fucking work? Because they see miracles. They see miracles every day, right?
Totally. And when you first hear the first 1,000 times that you hear it, it's very, very funny and very hilarious and amusingly unself-conscious and amusingly self-aware. It's like this angry, profane song about how wonderful everything is, and how like a caterpillar turns into a butterfly. And again, the knowledge, like if you read Valenger's 600-page memoir, Behind the Paint, he talks about when he was, the latchkey kid growing up in Detroit, he caught a butterfly and he put the butterfly into a jar, and then the next day the butterfly was dead. So as a result, everything that he's done has been dedicated to the butterfly. And again, this is people who were like, who were called a gang by the FBI. These are people who were, called a menace to society by Bill O'Reilly and Martin Bashir. I mean, that's one of the ironies. As in my book, I sort of talked about how in 2010, 2011, in the ICP, or maybe a little early before that, when they were, the most hated band in the world, Bill O'Reilly and Martin Bashir devoted, episodes to them. And, they're casting sour judgment. I remember Martin Bashir saying, like, you have this lyric, from US to Uranus, we're underground famous. Isn't that lyric dumb? and by the way, saying, like, probably to you, you seem like a smart ass motherfucker. But to us, so there was this idea. Again, I think there was this hatred of juggalos, and there was a judgment of juggalos, and this idea that they're the grossest people in the world. They're really racist. They're violent. They're these monsters. And when I explored the juggalo world, I discovered that was not the truth. And I discovered that there was this community, and there was this warmth, and there was this real embrace of outsiders and embrace of being different. I think, again, people think of it as like an all-white phenomenon. Like, there are a lot of juggalos of color.
Yeah.
Think about it all about.
We call those JOCs, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Bi jocks as well, I guess. Well, Black, Indigenous juggalos of color.
They're gay juggalos. They're trans juggalos. Like, it's a much different.
And they are united by a sense of just being spat upon, of being
well, I think also there's just this idea of you go to the gathering of the juggalos, there's a sense of freedom, there's a sense of liberation, there's a sense that you can be whoever you want to be. Violent J, he has a saying, the colder it is outside their circle, sort of the warmer it is inside. I was able to, I just kind of fell in love with this world and started being an outsider and being somebody who didn't feel understood, who didn't feel like he belonged anywhere. And God, I remember, at the end of my time as a professional pop culture writer, like the AV Club had this big music festival, and Pitchfork had this huge festival, and I would go to both and being like, this does not speak to me at all, and this does not speak to who I am, this does not speak to how I see the world. Like, I would 1,000 times rather be at the gathering of the juggalos. So I think that was kind of part of it, was kind of realizing that's kind of who I am. And it was very liberating, sort of realizing that, the tackiest, most bad taste people in the world are your people.
How much of this is a Midwestern sensibility? Are you from Wisconsin, or?
I am. I'm from the Midwest, definitely.
Okay, so and the Juggalos obviously are Detroit, Detroit-based. A kind of a lot of what you're talking about. It's kind of fascinating to think about
very
this,
much so.
Because the Midwest, and I am not from the Midwest, but I lived in Ohio on and off for about 20 years, and the Midwest is famous for not being ironic, not being dark, not admitting to darkness. All the best serial killers obviously come from the Midwest, but you don't admit that. Is there something in Midwestern, maybe in the Great Lakes water or something, that is seeping through everything?
Well, I'm from Chicago. And you kind of look at Chicago, and it's has this incredible legacy of Second City, and improv and all of these things. And then I think the Midwest is a lot more ghoulish, and a lot more Gothic. I think I kind of fooled myself into thinking that, we're a bunch of regular people, and it's everybody outside the Midwest who's really weird. And then decades and decades and decades of living in Chicago and Madison, Wisconsin, no, we're the weirdos.
Right.
And I remember, reading, you don't know, maybe you don't like me, I spent a lot of time in Ohio. And Ohio is enormous, and B, it's really friggin' weird. And I went to Detroit for my book.
But it is also on the, on its license plate, it used to say the heart of it all. And Columbus, by, myth, is the most normal city, or the most average and representative city in America. And that's where all the fast food restaurants go to try out, because this is America, but it's actually Gothic.
Yeah, very much so. God, I was thinking about, I grew up in a group home, and I was very lucky because we were next to a McDonald's that was a test kitchen. So all of the poorly conceived items would begin there. I remember there was a Bill Wennington burger, who was a backup center. He wasn't even a good player. He was like a mediocre player, but somehow, somebody had it in their head, we've done Michael Jordan Burger. What if we go from the most popular player and the best player to somebody people don't really care about? And I think it's part of it. I grew up in a group home where we had very dark senses of humor, and you had to have a dark sense of humor just to get through life, and you had to be self-deprecating, and you had to turn everything into a dark, weird joke so that it doesn't end up destroying you. It doesn't end up making you. And again, that's the essence of dark comedy, is that you laugh to keep from crying.
Is there a point where there's nothing left? If everything is kind of viewed cynically or ironically, is there a place where you can actually have a a kind of positive impact or a positive set of emotions as opposed to a kind of defensive gesture. I'm not going to take anything seriously.
Oh yeah, well I think that's kind of been the course of my career, was going from making fun of everything and being, you know, nihilistic and being cynical. I mean, God, in my memoir, The Bigger Wand, I talk about meeting my half brother, Vinny, for the first time, and how he took me to the mall to buy Insane Clown Posse merchandise, and saying, well, that, you know, settles the matter of nature versus nurture, firmly on the nurture side, because, you know, obviously I don't have anything in common with this weird dude who likes Insane Clown Posse. So to go from that to 4 years later writing a book about how you love Insane Clown Posse, and about how they are, you know, they speak to you on a soul deep level, you know, like that's one hell of a journey. And I feel like I've kind of gone through that with everything. We're kind of going from sneering and having a young person's perspective to kind of seeing the good in things that aren't supposed to be, finding the value in things that are supposed to be fundamentally valueless.
And that is the joy of trash. That's the joy you find in trash.
Oh, definitely, definitely.
Can I ask about a couple of the specific things? And the book is broken up helpfully into you know, various sections: the worst of literature, the worst of television, the worst of film, the worst of everything else. I want to ask because I esteemed two-time National Magazine Award finalist, esteemed political editor, PhD, blah blah blah. I worked for teen magazines back in the day, and when I was still on the rise. Those were the, you know, everything after the fall. But I interviewed Alf, the alien life form, the puppet sitcom star of the mid 1980s. And, you know, to interview Alf, you could only interview him over the phone, obviously, and things like that. And he worked blue on the phone, even as you couldn't print that. But you have a chapter in the book, The Joy of Trash, about Alf's attempt to become a late night talk show host. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you love so much about that?
Sure. Well, there was, I guess, on TV Land, they had like an elf marathon, as you do, and it was like hosted by Elf, and it did really, really well. And they were like, well, if people like Elf, like, you know, as a host of this marathon, maybe they would like him as a talk show host. So the first thing that they did was they got Ed McMahon as his sidekick. And
Johnny Carson's famous sidekick, the famous second banana in history.
Oh, yeah, it was kind of like, you know, if you had a Public Enemy knockoff, and Flavor Flav was their actual. And again, I remember like feeling sorry for Ed McMahon, because I'm like, even a dude who literally is a professional prostitute who will do anything for money. And again, it's like, I remember growing up, just he would do anything for money. You know, he would both do anything money, and then he was represented money because of the sweepstakes clearinghouse thing. And I sort of talk about in my piece there how there's this very pleasing arc he has, where at first he seems kind of invested, and then by the third episode he's completely checked out. Like he might as well be taking a nap.
I guess the check had cleared.
Oh, and again, I kind of felt like if this was kind of like an Adult Swim idea, and if you got people who were, if you got people from The Onion, if you got people from, you know, National Lampoon, like they could have done something kind of cool and kind of interesting with it, because it's not a bad idea necessarily. It's not like there was a Triumph, the Insult Comic Dog, and Jack McBrayer show that was kind of like That's My Bush, where it was very much a parody of the 1980s schlocky sitcoms, and it was really, really funny. But Robert Smigel was behind it. Whereas Alf's hit talk show, it seemed like you had like Pat Sajak levels of inspiration. I remember like, they got some amazing guests. They got Tom Green. They got Merv Griffin, I believe, sang a song with Alf. And I sort of talk about how at one point Tom Green is talking about his love life, as you do, and he's like, "Oh, what about you, Alf? You know, do you have a girlfriend? Do you have a partner?" And he's like, "Well, does it count if you pay for it?" And they kept that in. They kept a reference to Alf frequenting sex workers. And that was like canon. So from here on out, I will think of Alf as, you know, eating cats, being from Burbank, having all sorts of being wisecracking, and then also frequenting sex workers. Nothing wrong with that, you know, but it does get a little weird when you're from different species and you're from different planets.
You also mentioned a show, and I think of myself as a pretty good connoisseur of schlock culture. I don't remember the Emerald sitcom, Emerald Lagasse. What was that about, and what's going on with that?
Oh, sure. That was another thing where sometimes people have a lot of success in one field. Hey, sweetie.
Right there.
Oh, that's right, sweetie.
The bear.
That's cool.
A garden peeps.
Oh, that's awesome, sweetie. Sweetie, I've got to finish up. Hey, sweetie, can I? Hey, sweetie, can I finish up a podcast? I'll be with you in a little bit, sweetie. Is Mercy here? Yeah. Okay, good. Oh, that's my son. Declan Haven had like a cameo there. So Emerald Lagasse was this very, very, very successful chef. He was a TV chef, and people said, how can we harness the incredible popularity of the chef? Let's make a sitcom around him. This was the Thomasons, Linda Bloodworth Thomasons, who were famous for creating Designing Women,
right?
And then Evening Shade, and then also for being best friends with the Clintons,
right? These are highly acclaimed.
Oh, yeah.
Mostly in a southern milieu. They were.
So again, you kind of had this crazy idea, and the thing more, the fact that like George Foreman had his own sitcom,
right?
Like that is absolutely surreal. But again, I think the idea is, if you're famous doing one thing, you should theoretically be able to do everything else. So this ended up being like a very weird, oddly sleazy, incredibly sexist, kind of racist. They obviously had no idea what they're doing. They taped a pilot where it kind of focused over like his home life, and you had shots of him with his wife and like making suggestive comments. It's like, I do not want to think about Emerald's penis.
Right.
I don't want to think about him at home. There were like this syrupy music at the end there, and then people were like, oh god, people do not want that. They don't want, a syrupy sitcom with Emerald Lagasse. So they changed it so that it was all about their work life. And their work life was really weird and kind of creepy. There was an episode where they all had to lose a lot of weight, where they made a bet with another thing, and everybody had to, go on a diet at the same time. And, in the world of early sitcoms, that's just like a cheesy premise. Right. And you're like, that's immoral and that's unethical. And that leads me to dislike all of these characters. And then what happened with Emerald's sitcom is it aired right after the terrorist attacks of 9/11. And they blamed 9/11 on Emerald's failure. And that to me is absolutely fascinating because it had nothing, it didn't help, obviously. But the reason that Emerald's sitcom was a colossal failure is because Emerald never should have had a sitcom to begin with. And he was kind of a straight man. They brought in Robert Urich. And it's been on many, many successful hit shows. Yeah. You just feel sorry for him. I remember he has a line where
it's kind of like he's McMurphy after the lobotomy.
And
One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and then he gets put on a sitcom.
I remember the one line that I remember from him is he says, the Barbie twins, they have enormous boobs, and they wrote a book about the pain of bulimia. So I'm going to a party for them. And again, this was a show by one of the foremost female creators in the history of television. And you have a line like that made it into the show that aired. So I think about that. I also think about the the Turtle Club sequence in the movie Master of Disguise.
Right. By one of the absolute funniest people in history.
Oh, from SNL, definitely. David Harvey, he was hilarious. He was a genius on Saturday Night Live. He was so fun. Him and Mike Myers, from 89 to 96. They had it all, and then something happened. One of the I'm obsessed with Saturday Night Live, sort of as part of my generation, and I was fascinated by Master of Disguise, which is this unspeakably terrible movie that Dana Carvey made. There's a fair amount of him in brown face. It's offensive for so many reasons, but there's a scene called the Turtle Club where his character, Pistachio Disguisey, dresses up like a giant turtle, like a mutated turtle man, to get into this club, and his sidekick, played by, I think, a woman who was on NYPD, she's like, I think you got this wrong. It's just a name. You don't actually have to be a turtle. You don't have to be a grotesque, distorted turtle man to get into this club. And then, it's this very surreal kind of nightmare fuel and sort of according to popular legend, they filmed that scene on 9/11.
Yeah.
And what I discovered was that was not true, but it was the first scene that they filmed after 9/11. And Dana Carvey went and like they had like a pep talk where they talked about how, you know, Bin Laden has struck us, you know, the world is at war, but we can fight a blow for good and justice and democracy by filming this ridiculous sequence. So I think that's kind of, you know, there are all these sort of weird commonalities, all these ways in which they kind of overlap, and with Master of Disguise, and then with Emerald, the fact that they're two incredibly bad taste, ill-conceived comedies that I will always associate with 9/11 is kind of fascinating to me.
In a more recent thing, which is in the section called The Worst of Everything Else, you talk about Gal Gadot and her friend's Imagine video. What itch does that scratch? That was universally denounced almost immediately, right?
Oh, totally. And I think that's what's kind of fascinating about it, is that it was so ill-conceived, you know, it had such good intentions. And you look back, and this is like maybe 5 or 6 days into the pandemic, like, oh, we were so young, we were so naive. So this idea of just, I will have all of the celebrities in the world badly group sing Imagine, and they'll do like half a line a piece.
Right.
And it was universally reviled. And again, it was kind of this cathartic thing where left and right, liberals and conservatives, everybody was able to come together and say, this is a nightmare, and this was a terrible, terrible idea. Kind of reminded me of Anna Lynn McCord.
Yeah.
With a Beverly Hills 90210 actress. She recorded a video at the beginning of the
Ukraine-Russian war.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it was this poem, and it was a poem directed directly to Vladimir Putin, about how if I was your mother, we would have such a wonderful relationship. I'd make you feel so loved. I would hold you in my arms. There was like really, really terrible prose to it.
Yeah.
And yeah, just the combination of really, really good intentions and no self-consciousness and no self-awareness, and also responding to an international tragedy or an international crisis in a way that's, how can I make this about me? And I don't think Gal Gadot meant to do that. Like, she was very well intentioned, but she just didn't know what she was doing. And somebody should have been like, this is a cute idea. It's going to be terrible. Like, nobody's going to like it. Like, you can't really do this. This kind of cheapens what's supposed to be profound or what's supposed to be moving.
You also talk about, in The Worst of Everything Else, Dale Allen Cooper, Impressionist for Christ, A Time to Laugh, a 1974 work. Who was Dale Allen Cooper, and why does he make your cut?
Dale Allen Cooper is an impressionist for Christ. He's a good, solid Christian, and I have a friend who's a stand-up comedian, and he discovered this album. I think he might have actually like found a copy of it, and then I think he put it on YouTube, and it's this really, really fascinating historical document from 1973. And God bless him, Dale Allen Cooper decided that he was going to serve Christ by being an impressionist. So he put out this album, and part of it is him doing these really, really bad impressions. One of the marks of being an impressionist is he starts each impression with, I'm Jimmy Stewart, or I'm Alfred Hitchcock, or I'm blah, blah, blah. And then you can sort of hear a baby crying throughout a lot of it. You know, it becomes kind of this hypnotic element where you're worrying about the baby or thinking about the baby, and the baby's there for a little bit. And then he also combined it with this sort of very straightforward preaching, and very kind of weirdly reactionary preaching and conservative preaching. And she at one point he like talks about how there are homosexual churches and this is an abomination, and it's this really, really fascinating combination, again, of good intentions and then a lack of self-awareness and a lack of self-consciousness that becomes, you know, it's funny for the wrong reasons and tragic for the wrong reasons as well. It's really, really fascinating. And yeah, I just kind of, you know, sort of talked about being a professional rememberer. Like, yeah, I think that's definitely one of the it's definitely one of the things that
So
I'm proud of remembering.
Your website, Nathan Rabin's Happy Place, you've spent a lot of time and you've written a lot about Weird Al Yankovic. Weird Al Yankovic is kind of like your spirit animal. What is the essence of why you like Weird Al and disseminate comic books based on him and all sorts of
Coloring
things
books.
like that. Coloring books, excuse me.
Yeah, well, basically in 2011 or so, I was working on You Don't Know, Maybe You Don't Like Me, and I got a Twitter message saying, "Hey, this is Weird Al Yankovic. Would you like to write my column? Would you like to write my coffee table book?"
Mhm.
And I remember showing my wife that and us jumping up and down and saying, "Oh my God, we're going to be rich. We're going to be rich." And he was my early childhood hero. The first concert that I ever went to was him opening for the Monkees. The first album, one of the first albums I ever bought was in 3D. I was overjoyed and I was honored. And then when I started my own website, I kind of figured I can delve a lot deeper into it. And I talked about things in kind of a visual way, kind of like a superficial way in the coffee table book, but I can go deep into every single song. So I wrote about every song and every single album, and it was a very unpopular online feature. It turns out people don't want to read a 1,000-word essay about "She Never Told Me She Was a Mime," but when I put it all together with my illustrator Felipe Sobrero's illustrations, like it came together beautifully, and I think it made a really strong argument for Weird Al as a very important satirist, as an artist. You know, he's not just like the novelty dude who did Eat It. You know, he's created a legacy. He's created this body of work, and yeah, that just kind of. I feel like there's been a renewed appreciation for Weird Al, even though he hasn't put out a new album in 8 years. You know, I feel like we as a culture are finally catching up to him, and he has his own pinball. He's got a massive tour coming up, and he has his own movie in which Daniel Radcliffe plays Weird Al Yankovic. So very, very nice. And he said that it's going to be weirder than the Swiss Army Man. Wow. Which is saying something, because that was a movie where he played a farty magical corpse. Right. He did a great job playing a farty magical corpse, but it was a very strange movie, and this is going to be
weirder.
Weirder, yes.
And he's interesting in the same way that The Onion, like you were saying, you know, there had been fake news before, but what is great about The Onion is the headlines are funny, and all the way through the end of everything that's on the page, it's actually funny. Weird Al, I remember when Another One Rides the Bus came out, and he had, you know, all the earmarks of a one-hit parody record guy.
Oh, totally.
And is a fascinating character in his own right, and then has had a career that is probably longer on average than most of the people and bands that he has parodied.
Oh yeah, very much so. He's endured, you know, and he's endured because, you know, there's substance, and because, you know, there's he has incredible quality control, and there's a level of attention to detail, you know, that's really, really remarkable, and also that you see in everything that he's done. Right. So he doesn't half-ass anything. So yeah.
You are also on your website. You you have a podcast devoted to the films of John Travolta and Nicolas Cage. Explain why they kind of exemplify many of the things that you're particularly interested in kind of wading through.
Although then I should probably get off because my wife is sending me desperate emails about me to relive our thing there. Sure. Well, this was, I kind of got started. The inspiration for this was the movie The Fanatic and Poison Rose, which were two terrible late period John Travolta movies. But they're terrible in a really fascinating way. I mean, The Fanatic was written and directed by Fred Durst. And it's just...
Of Limp Bizkit.
Yeah, I remember thinking, like, you know, I just love his world so much that I could just live in it forever. And then I thought, well, there's Nicolas Cage. I could do something about Nicolas Cage and John Travolta, you know, and I think they both kind of exemplify, you know, sort of the transcendent nature of bad at its best. You know, that Nicolas Cage has starred in so many terrible movies, but also so many great movies. And the same passion, the same intensity, the same, you know, eccentricity, you know, that leads to something like The Wicker Man also is behind Vampire's Kiss. You know, and original conceit of it was to see who is the greater artist, who's a greater actor, who's a greater movie star. And about 3 weeks in, we're like, oh, Nicolas Cage is taking this in a walk. Right. Because Nicolas Cage, I think, is just one of the greatest actors ever to, you know, appear on the screen. And John Travolta, I love him, but he's just like a handsome movie star. He doesn't have the incredible level of artistry. He also does not have the incredible legacy that Nicolas Cage. I mean, you look at like 1975 to 1981, like nothing but hits, nothing but great stuff. But you know, in the ensuing 4 decades, it's been much more bad than good.
Is the brilliance of Nicolas Cage that he gives it all he's got, whether it is a shit movie or Oscar bait?
Oh, totally. And you know, that's one of the things we saw is like if John Travolta's in a bad movie, he generally gives a bad performance. Like he sinks to the level. Whereas Nicolas Cage, even if he's in Ghost Rider, and nothing about Ghost Rider is any damn good at all, except for Nicolas Cage's performance. And he's having a blast. He's having a lot of fun. He's drinking jelly beans and listening to the Carpenters. So yeah, there's this joy that he brings to his work that is transcendent, you know, and interesting even when it's not, you know, his best work or particularly good even.
As a final summing up, one of the things that I find interesting about your work, besides everything that you do, is that you have shifted over time. You know, you were at the AV Club. You helped make that one of the premier kind of entertainment critical supplements, sites, sources. And now you've been going it alone for a number of years. How do you like that? Do you think this is a golden age for independent kind of professional rememberers? Is it good? What do you gain by being on your own, and what do you lose?
No, it's funny actually when you say going it alone. The way I think about that is in the movie Unforgiven. Morgan Freeman asks Clint Eastwood, "You haven't had a wife in a while, you know, do you have a girlfriend?" And he's like, "No." He's like, "So you're going it alone?" Meaning you just masturbate. But no, so it's like, again, I kind of like to say sort of the happy place is a combination of desperation and inspiration. Because I all my columns were being canceled. I was unemployable, but I found this way. I found this alley, this world that I could create and have complete control over. And I don't make a lot of money. I don't get a lot of press generally, but there is a purity to it in the sense of like I can do whatever I want. I mean, today I published column called Talking About Bruno, where I wrote about all 7 movies that Willis made last year. And it was enormous fun. Like they're all terrible, but it was so interesting, just kind of living in this weird world for like 2 weeks and then sharing that with people.
And that is a world where a man who was once the biggest movie star, arguably on the planet, is now churning out 7 movies a year. None of which will be seen by anybody.
And in all of them, he's in there for 10 minutes and he's sitting in a chair the entire time. So yeah, it's been a blast, and I wish it was a little more secure. I wish it was a little easier, but you know, it's a trade-off.
Right.
Like, I have complete creative freedom for it, you know, living paycheck to paycheck and always struggling. But it's great. I don't have any other skills. So yeah, I wouldn't have it any other way.
Well, the book is The Joy of Trash. The website is Nathan Rabin's Happy Place. Nathan Rabin, thanks so much for being a professional rememberer and talking to the Reason interview.
Awesome. Thank you so much.